Hey everybody, welcome back to our scenario playthrough series. This is part number 2 of our Evergreen Gardens build. This is the largest park that we've had to deal with so far in our scenarios, and it also has the largest goal with 1,000 people in the end of year 4. Plenty of time though, and we got off to a good start last go around with the Zero Coaster and that Arrow Coaster. So we're going to start out here with the largest coaster in the park. So this is a Schwarzkopf looping coaster, and I wanted to do this kind of straight away once I saw the map with the nice terrain that we have. It just very much reminds me of something like at Liseberg in Sweden. If you've ever been there, they have a beautiful coaster called Liseberg Banan. It's an old Schwarzkopf coaster that kind of meanders its way around a hillside, and I really wanted to do something in a similar fashion to it. This didn't end up being quite as long, but I'm still pretty happy with how it turned out. I'm leaving in a lot of the kind of back and forth of figuring out this layout, just because I think it's important to see that, sometimes you can't just bang out these layouts straight away. Sometimes it actually takes a little bit of figuring and trying and not being satisfied with it and just kind of going back and forth until you're happy with it. So I would encourage you in general to iterate with your projects and just keep on going, keep on trying different things until you find something you're happy with. Of course, in the scenario mode, that ends up being a little bit of a challenge because you only have a limited time to do it. So in some cases, I need to make a branch save and just play around with it for a little while, but we didn't need to here because 4 years is plenty of time, and we're already cruising pretty well with the Peeps goal. We're already at 640 something guests at year 3 at the beginning, so plenty of time to really crank this out. So you can see we're trying to get a helix here that works well, and we keep running into either the same track or the pathway or landscape, and just in general I didn't really want something as high up as we're doing right now because it just doesn't quite have the same feel to it. So zooming around a little bit, and it's probably maybe a little bit much when we're at 4 times speed, so I apologize if it's giving you motion sickness, but just trying a whole bunch of different things. Here I looked at maybe going across and dropping up underneath of the lift hill and doing a larger drop to begin with, but one of the things that I really like about Liseberg Banan is that it doesn't really have that one huge drop. It kind of builds on itself all the way down the hillside. And so instead of doing that, I said, all right, well, let's just do some kind of a curve element here, and let's curve off the lift hill, do just kind of nice elements here that really kind of get the project going. So here's where we're going to end up starting with, is just this nice wide helix curve drop and lead into this other helix that we were trying for so long earlier, trying to get right, and we're going to try for it again to get things going. Certainly it's one of those builds where you kind of keep rebuilding similar things, still can't believing that it doesn't fit. And I know I tend to do that sometimes, but need to get something that flows really nicely, need to get something that doesn't run into too many things, and also manages the speed well. So I like this first helix, so we're going to keep that and keep the second drop over the pathway on the other side as well. And in the meantime, we'll go around and fix up the mess of pathways that we have here. Not that our park rating has ever really been an issue. Like, park rating to me is one of the easiest things to maintain. It's just there's nothing super hard about it in most of the scenarios, but we want to make sure that we're still doing what we need to do. So still trying with this helix, and in the end what we're going to do is rather than going a full 360 here or even further, we're going to kind of turn it around and then turn it back over top of itself. I'm still trying to get used to the whole unbanked diving corners. Obviously in RCT2 the Arrow Coaster still doesn't have it, and some of the other ones as well, but it's just such a useful thing, and it just looks so much better, and you just kind of have to get over the fact that you don't have that look, and it just kind of looks a little funky when you're going down those elements. So there we go, we finally got ourselves out of that hole, and now we're into this other little valley here as we try and figure out what goes on next in the space. I like the flow of the whole thing so far. It kind of meanders its way nicely, it maintains its speed pretty well, and I don't necessarily have the height to do a full-size coaster like Liseberg Banan. That's a gigantic coaster in the end, and instead we're going to do a little bit of a figure 8 here to finish it off and try and complete the layout. So trying a whole bunch of different things here. One of the challenges is the station is on the other side of the mountain. I don't really want to do a giant tunnel, so instead I'm going to start by working our way backwards. We're going to put in a brake run here. I am using the diagonal brake since that is a feature that was added to Open RCT. That's kind of the only non-original game thing that I'm using. Everything else is all RCT1 build, I suppose. So it's as close to the vanilla as you can get, but I do like those diagonal pieces, and you can use them without enabling any cheats. So for me, that's an okay thing in my book. So trying to get this to work right, we have this great terrain that this is a beautiful map. I'd be really curious to hear about the development as to what it took to build this map originally, like back when with Chris Sawyer and the gang. Just because the whole premise is just really, really beautiful. Great gardens, and I love the terrain here because it just sets you up to do some really cool stuff. It may take you forever to do it, as is this coaster, but it's turning out pretty well, I think. So we are going to dive down here towards the end, and I'm going to make this little tiny tunnel, kind of reminiscent of Mindbender at Over Georgia, with a nice little tunnel at the end of that Schwarzkopf. I am lowering this section because, again, I don't want the coaster to touch the ground. Real coasters don't do that, so with exception. But we're going to move that a little bit, keep a little retaining wall there on the side, so we got a bit of a sheer cliff, which is kind of fun. I'm going to use the cutaway here for a second just because I can't see very well what's going on in here, but I want to smooth out this little kind of basin that the coaster dives into before we get too far along. And we're going to use the landscape textures just to clean it up a little bit. I want to raise up this tunnel just a bit because it feels maybe a little claustrophobic at the moment and cramped. Give it a little bit of room to breathe, and then our favorite grass and dirt texture. Again, that grass and dirt texture is, to me, one of the best things you can do to make your landscaping look good in the game. The grass is nice, but the grass and dirt just adds another layer of texture that you can't really have with just the grass. So I highly encourage the use of that whenever possible. So we're going to keep that little line of trees there in front because it obscures the station kind of nicely there. And we'll use our 2 trains here. Adjust the block brakes. I really don't ever like to use the 4 miles per hour just because it creeps in so slowly. I do stick a block brake at the very far end and just kind of open it up real wide so it will clear off the lift a little sooner. Still realistic because the ride's in the brakes and it's fine, but it just helps our operations ever so slightly just to keep the thing moving. So as we test out the ride, we're going to throw in some fencing here. I don't ever like having sheer cliffs without any kind of fence somewhere around, just because you don't want your park guests to go wander off the cliff. Not like they're ever going to do it in the game itself, but I mean, that's part of the fun, is thinking about how this would be attempted realistically. So the last stream, we looked at potentially building some of these towers elsewhere on the map, and we didn't do it at the time. So now I'm going to do it again, and we're going to do it here instead. We did do the double towers in the Diamond Heights playthrough as well. I do like the double towers because you usually do see these together in larger parks, especially like the Six Flags and Cedar Fair parks. You would see a lot of these kind of double or triple or even quad towers together. And for us, it's going to increase our soft guest gap a little bit and give us a little more input on money. Lets us use one with shot drop and one with the vertical shot, so we get the upward launch and downward launch mode. So we got 2 of those side by side, and it sits it nicely up here on the hillside, so it'll be a cool visual as you come in just to see these big towers kind of looming off in the distance. I always like to think about that long view when we go through it. It stands above the tree line here, up a good ways from how you come in. So you'll come in through that valley, walk into the front area there with the carousel, and then be able to just kind of see this off in the distance. And I feel like that would be a really kind of cool look in general. We did unlock the information stall at this point, so I want to use that so we can start selling some umbrellas and things. I don't do the whole $25 umbrella trick. Yes, I know it's going to make you a ton of money, but I don't know, it just feels kind of cheap. So I try and avoid stuff like that if we can do it. So Now that we've got our rides running up here, we're going to connect to this section of pathway. So we're slowly getting there where we've added back a lot of the pathway elements that were there initially. I don't want to do it too fast still because I just don't need giant expanses of pathway being wandered on that we're not going to put a ride with as well. So now we're going to look at expanding up this monorail. We have done the monorail in kind of pieces, and it's still not going to open. It's not going to open until kind of almost the end of the scenario, which is fine. I didn't really count on it being useful for our actual playthrough itself. I just kind of wanted it as part of the aesthetic of the map. So here's our second station. We're actually building backwards, if you'll notice. Really doesn't matter which way you go, to be honest, as far as I'm concerned. It could go clockwise or counterclockwise, but got the second station here, and I'm trying to, as best as I can, avoid pathway crossings that I have to modify the pathway kind of up and over. I always think that looks a little silly when you have to do that for monorails or railroads or anything else. And the monorail, which is usually an above ground sort of thing, you shouldn't really ever have to deal with that, but we are keeping our monorail at the same height the entire way around, so that just means that at this height it sits on the ground, which I actually think is kind of a neat little detail, because that way we get some cool interaction with the pathway, we get some cool interaction with the coaster up above, and this is the mini monorail cars too, so they're open air, and you'll get to kind of have that really nice experience of being able to interact with all the different bits and pieces. I actually really do like those mini monorail cars. It's kind of got that old school vibe to it, and I think these are based off of the Blackpool Pleasure Beach ones, which were just very nostalgic, I think, in terms of monorail vehicles. And I think you still have to unlock the streamlined ones that are more based off of the Disneyland or probably an RCT version, Alton Towers monorail vehicles. So now we are finished with that whole section there and looking at what we can do next. And while we're throwing in thrill rides, it feels like we might as well put another one over here. So we're going to, on the suggestion of one of the folks in Twitch chat, we're going to put a top spin right here, kind of lowering the section of landscape. I'm trying not to, as best as possible, alter the landscape in any kind of huge way. I'm trying to make things look like they fit within the landscape, not kind of dominating it or having to modify it in any kind of huge capacity. I think we did that okay last go around in Diamond Heights. This go around, I think we did pretty well as well. One of the things that I maybe regret is getting into some of the really nice landscaped areas and kind of screwing around with them or modifying them in a way that really probably wasn't the best look. So I might go back through and redo that a little later. And actually, I did, in a suggestion from Andrew from Mickey Man's RCT station, who's also doing this scenario right now, he had suggested, well, maybe we ask for ride names and things like that, because I don't typically name my rides. I usually kind of forget about it, or it's just something super generic. But so I'm going to throw that out there. If anybody has any suggestions for ride names for any of these or some other park suggestions, I think we're going to do an Evergreen Gardens expanded after this. So somewhere within our typical cadence of playing through these scenarios, we're going to go back to this one and, after the goal, do a little bit of further expansion, maybe try and get the gardens to once again feel a little more tied in with all these rides that we're adding, and just try and make it look a little nicer, I guess, in addition. So we'll see about doing this on some future scenarios as well, but that gives us a little bit of interactivity. So if you have any comments as you're watching this, feel free to let me know what you think, and maybe we'll see those changes come into the next round of it. Alright, so now we get to our fourth and our last coaster for this map, and someone had suggested a Vekoma wooden coaster, which is kind of a different version of what we might do. So we looked at that initially, and then we ended up instead going with something that is based off of Loup-Garou Werewolf at Walibi, Belgium, and it's got kind of a neat kind of cyclone-esque layout, bit of a double out and back with these kind of nice peaked curving turnarounds. And I thought on this side of the map we've got some space to do it, and we've got a an area here where it kind of hugs the edge of the map, so why don't we give that a try? Of course, I did have to destroy a couple of these sections of landscaping, which is kind of what I was alluding to earlier, that I would like to do something that brings back some of those elements and really makes it fit a little more naturally into the space. But you can see here as we build this up, we're kind of trying to do these nice little peak turnarounds. I'm not banking my larger corners, the ones that go onto the diagonal. I typically don't on a lot of these, especially ones that aren't necessarily twisters or inherently twisters. I try and avoid that as best as possible, just because you really see underbanking on a lot of these kind of things. You know, this is almost all kind of CCIS, Custom Coasters International. So in general, I don't really do a lot of banking unless we get into some kind of like a helix or a fast corner or things like that. But you can take these corners at a pretty good speed and still be all right. I've said before, and I'll say it again, I don't really pay attention to stats. I don't really care what the stats are. If the guests aren't going to ride it, then okay, it is what it is. I'm a little more concerned about looks, but in general, if you do it right and if you do it realistically, your stuff is not going to be awful, and the ratings are going to be generally okay. So we're going to turn out from the double out and back kind of bit right there and kind of finish with this bit that kind of sticks out from the rest of the layout, which is a little bit of a weird design, but this is how Werewolf does it in real life. I wanted to end with like a little helix or something, and wasn't quite satisfied with that, so I figured we can make this slightly more compact by getting rid of the section of this little landscape hill and doing it right here. Also necessitates us getting rid of this little dock, but we'll put that back in a little bit as well. Lets us go into these diagonal breaks and finish off the layout, and I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. In general, I think the ride layouts did okay in this scenario. The Zero isn't immediately obvious what it's based off of, and it really wasn't based off of anything per se, just kind of a general style and vibe. But I think the other three coasters are quite obvious as to what they're based off of, which I'm good with. So we got plenty of money now, so we can really work on adjusting that landscaping without any kind of concern. Also going through here, I'm going to eliminate this little planter box there, and keep as many of these little forested trees there as we can. We'll duck underneath the landscape here and underneath the coaster to put our pathway in there. I try and avoid, if I can, kind of having these long pathways that are just kind of like hidden underneath the structure. In general, I kind of like the pathway on the outside of the coaster, but we just really didn't have a space to easily do that this time around, so we're going to kind of leave it at this. I was hoping that I was going to unlock the mine scenery, which is why I left that 2x2 space in the little square there by the queue, but as it turns out, you only get the Roman scenery in this map in the original game, so it is what it is. We can't really do quite what I wanted to, but come back later here for our expanded edition, and maybe we'll do a little bit more theming with some nicer bushes and trees and things like that, maybe some good fences. I mean, fencing in general really carries the theme in these kind of scenarios where you just don't have much other scenery to work with. So we're connecting up the pathways now. We've really covered pretty much everything at this point. There are still some kind of long gaps with nothing in it, but for the most part, we are filled out on the park and at least kind of have that bare minimum that now it feels like it's appropriate to connect everything out. As you can see in the bottom left here, we've just passed our goal, 1,005 guests now, and we're in May of year 4, so we still have plenty of time to add a lot of finishing touches here and just kind of keep things going a little bit. So we're going to use that Roman theming and put back a little bit of the stuff that I deleted earlier and wasn't able to stick back. I did want to stick a little statue in this helix, so at least it had sort of a focal point there to begin with. So we'll do that. I think it adds a little bit here and there, not too much to be fair, but something, minimal theming is still theming, so that works for me. So we got our coaster looking pretty good there. We've got our all of our coasters looking pretty good here. We're going to adjust some pricing here. Nobody's using those mazes, which I think I was probably a little too aggressive in the price for that initially anyways, so we'll be okay with that one. So looking at what else we have, we've really put in a lot of the things. I tend not to do the motion simulators or really the 3D cinemas quite as much, just because I don't necessarily like the look of them in realistic type play. The 3D cinema does look pretty good, but the motion simulator, if anything, I want to stick it inside so you don't really see it. But now that we got the bulk of our park built, we can finish up this monorail finally. So trying to figure out a way that works for this monorail going through the structure here and then across, so we actually can make it work without having to change elevation, which is a win for me, and exactly what I wanted to do with it. So we're going to keep it at that 15-foot height the whole go around. So I was looking for a station platform over here, and really anything that I built over on that side would have been awfully high up off the ground, and I'm trying to avoid that as much as possible. So what we're going to do is stick one right here kind of on the side of this mound. We've got this kind of treetops walk on the backside here, which I love. I think it's a really nice addition, and we're going to integrate that here in just a minute with a ride. But now we've pretty much finished up and are able to get our monorail connected here. So there we go. We've got a 3-station monorail, which, you know, initially the plan was to do 2 monorails, I think I mentioned in the last video, but in the end it didn't quite work out for that one. So we're going to do a single monorail with a triple station. I think it covers the kind of 3 areas pretty well, and the different sections between the stations feel reasonably similar. I don't really want anything to be one where it's just stupidly long compared to another shorter section. I don't know, it just feels better to have it as even as possible. So I think that's the goal, and it feels like we've accomplished that to some degree. So now that we've opened up all of this pathway, we really need to bring back all of these handymen. And again, I don't usually do the whole setting up the boundaries for them, but in this instance it felt large enough that I probably ought to, just to make sure we have at least decent coverage, and then I can more or less kind of spot issues and fix them as we go along without having to worry too much about trying to spot it and find it from just searching around. So here is our last kind of large ride, I suppose. We're going to do a rapids ride, and we're going to fit it through the forest here. So I thought it would be kind of a neat idea, since you have this great forest walk with the raised pathway and everything, and a pretty dense conifer forest back here, that wouldn't it be neat if there was also like a little raging rapids through the middle of it. So I'm going to build one of these. I like to set my rapids into the landscape a little bit, because usually you see them like that with the theming and everything. Rarely do you see them just kind of like sitting on top of the landscape in a concrete trough and stuff like that. So in this instance, I figured that was probably the best, even though you have these weird little gaps when you go through corners and things like that. With custom scenery, you can make that look a whole lot better, but we don't have that, so that's okay. We've got some waterfall elements, some rapids elements, and of course some whirlpools and things like that. So always like to add what we can in there. I'm also going to try and screen those waterfalls as best as we can with a little bit of the landscaping and the rock pieces. Going to pick our monorail here and open it up, because we forgot to do that. So now we're going to open it up. I actually forgot to open a couple of rides here, so thank you for everybody in Twitch chat who was like, "Hey idiot, open your rides," and actually make money off of them. So here we are now, filling out a little bit of the landscaping for this last little bit. Again, we're going to hide that waterfall as best as we can. I didn't really want to do too much dramatic landscaping here, because I wanted to keep that kind of high up above the forest walkway going on, so I didn't want to bring the landscaping too much up level with that pathway if we can. We do have to duck down here and build our entrance and exit, and then kind of come up to normal ground level here. This is one of the things, by the way, that the Parkitect game does really well. Log flumes and rapids and things like that, you can sink down into the landscaping, and it really does a seamless job filling in the whole thing. So that's a big win, in my opinion, for the Parkitect game, and it is one of my favorite kind of games after RCT, so would recommend, if you've never given that game a try, to give it a shot. So I realized I hadn't put a lot of food stalls back this way, so I figured we should at least do a little kind of food area in this region. So we're going to do a restroom and some food things and all that, because with 4 years we have plenty of time to unlock all of the different research elements, and I've had it on maximum funding since the very beginning, so we're kind of cranking it out at this point, and there's just more stuff than we have time to build, so that's good. Thought I'd put in a Ferris wheel because we haven't done one of them, and what better place to put a Ferris wheel than kind of as far up as you can get on the map, because really your Ferris wheel is about the view. So let's take what already has a good view and make it even better. So we're going to add that in here at the top of the little hillside here. Also makes that pathway a little more justified to have something up there on top. So now as we look through what else we can do here, there's not a lot that I really want to do with coasters because we've filled out kind of the big areas here in general. We could probably squeeze another couple in here and I'd be okay with that, but for the purposes of this scenario and knowing how much time we've got, since it's August year 4, I didn't really want to get into anything major beyond that. So what I did want to do is throw in another car ride here. I was kind of looking at this mountain the whole time going, wouldn't it be neat if you had a car ride that circled the whole darn thing? So we're prepping this a little bit and trying to figure out a way to do that without having to get into the guest pathways too much. So we're going to do all these little tiny tunnels, which I realize it completely goes against my little mantra about not wanting to do tunnels. But, so be it in this instance. We'll just say that the park had some extra money in this case and some impotence to really build out this a little better. To be honest, this mountain looks like it would be artificial anyways, so we can say they built it when they were building the mountain. So make your storyline what works to get through what you want to do, I guess I would say. So you get a meandering layout that ended up being fairly long, to be honest, and we did modify the pathway there. I said earlier I don't like modifying the pathway to go up and over. I feel like this one was okay because we're only modifying half of it, essentially, but I'm still trying to avoid it as best as possible. So we'll try and hide a little bit of these tunnels as best as we can. They're kind of changing theming throughout because we've got this sort of more rugged forested area here in the back, so we're going to use the wood there. Up front we have a little more manicured garden, so we're going to go ahead with the stone look, and I think that looks a little classier perhaps. So we're nearly there with the whole layout. So in this instance we're going to go through some tunnels again and pop out here at the very end. We still need to add a station. That's kind of the last thing that we're going to add here. In general, I start to build these usually and then figure the station and that kind of stuff out as we go. So we're going to nestle the station into the side of the mountain just a little bit here, put our entrance and exit, and then we're going to call it a day. I also thought it would be kind of neat to have the two different theming elements there. So we get the wood on the one side, the stone on the other side, and it's kind of shows the two different dichotomies on either side of this mountain from a theming standpoint, even though there's not a ton of theming, I suppose. So add back a little bit of stuff, since we did have to modify a fair amount of this to get it to fit in there initially. So I will go ahead and add in some of that fencing, simplify out some of the other fencing that was already there, and just try and smooth it out a little bit. We definitely have a problem here with some litter up top, so we'll add a couple of handymen. At this point when you have so much money, you can just kind of dump handymen into it, and it really doesn't matter. At the beginning I'm always worried about how much I'm spending on things, but now you don't have to worry about that. You just kind of do it. So easy enough, and in general it's just fine. So adding a couple little bits and pieces here at the end, we added a bunch of mechanics because we realized we only had like 3, so we're going to add back all those at the end and just kind of get our park ready for the final win here at the end. So as we roll into our October 31st time frame, we're at October 26th here. We've got 1,300 some people. Didn't really have to try too hard for that one without advertising campaigns and things like that, so worked out pretty well, I think, and I'm relatively happy with how this one turned out. Certainly this is the last of the easy park, so it will get a little more challenging from here, but you know what? It works pretty well. So let's go take a look at the real-time stuff. So here we are with the completed Evergreen Gardens. I feel like we did a pretty decent job filling out the park. There's something in most all of the corners. Certainly we could still fill out this a lot more and get it squeeze in there a little bit, but I'm comfortable with where it is now. Certainly to what we talked about in the time lapse, that if we do an extended version of this, Then I think we'll add a couple more coasters and maybe some other rides and things like that. But let's look at the park. A quick tour here. As you come in as a guest standpoint, you get to have this cool little view of this waterfall and this log flume. Kind of weird that you take the log flume, the only drop on the log flume, backwards. But that was a suggestion in chat, so thanks to whoever suggested that. I think it's kind of funky and weird. Got our monorail up here that's going to wander its way around the whole park with the 3 stations. Let's pick up our coaster here once this clears the block and see how it meanders around the hillside here. Everybody always asks for stats, so let's go ahead and pull those up. This is 5.02, looks like 5.78 and 3.82, so not too bad on the whole. Wasn't really based off of anything, more so it's just a zero that meanders around the hillside, so kind of reminiscent of some of the mall zero coasters and things like that, but not too bad, I think. We have our haunted house up on the top here with our spooky plants and paths and all that, so gotta check all those boxes when it comes to the haunted houses, and I think that was a good setting for the whole thing as you come in on the side there. Up the hill on the opposite side to our little Roman top hillside here, got our arrow coaster that I think actually did a pretty nice job at filling out this whole space. But we did call this one Crazy Roller Coaster, of course based off of the inspiration for this ride. Giant here at the end. Happy we did unlock the Roman scenery because the statue worked well in this spot right there. But nice little layout, I think. And not too bad. 6.45, 6.23, 2.99. Feels like that's actually pretty decent for an arrow coaster. Giant train like that. A little car ride that hops over the water on both sides, and some topiaries scattered throughout. But we did replace the flowers and everything in here with these 2 hedge mazes. I think maybe if I redid this, I would probably try and do a little more pattern with the mazes, just to kind of make it look, I don't know, at least slightly more organized perhaps, but for the most part I'm okay with it. Our carousel garden here in the middle with this nice sized plaza. That was, we built this thing out initially. I'd kind of like to do more larger plazas like this, just because I feel like this density is pretty nice, and then it really kind of gets a lot less dense as we go further out. Couple people using our swan boats. Still a decent ride or line for the scrambler as well. And then we have the swinging ship as well into the space. I think I'd probably like to scatter about a couple of pathways through here as well, because it does seem like a very nice kind of treed, pleasant walk throughout that whole thing. Up on the hillside we have our coaster, which was called Fractal. That was one of the suggestions in the chat. Appreciate for that one. Again, based on Lee's Berkman, we've got a kind of nice flowy layout with this whole thing. So Fractal has 5.24, like 4.99, and 2.45, which is actually not too bad. Be on the lower side, perhaps. Not awful. I don't know if I missed one of the stat penalties for the ride, but again, don't care about the stats, but it is. I'm pretty happy with how the layout flows through the whole thing, and it whistles in the valley. I do like this valley here. Kind of go up and down the hillside a couple times, and then through it at the end. Terrestrial on top. Our double launch tower and shot tower, I think, look pretty good, and the top spin that sits here a little bit lower. These RCT top spins always get me a little bit, but on the whole, it's fine. All things. We have our kind of artificial looking mountain back here that kind of feels like it's begging for us to put this observation tower on top, so we did. And then our nice little car ride here that wanders its way all the way around this mountainside. Rapids ride kind of meanders through this whole space and doesn't do a whole heck of a lot, but I feel like it would be a neat visual from kind of way up here, the treetops on this pathway as you look through the whole thing. And then finally, our last of the maps, our wooden coaster, based on Loop Garou in Wallaby, Belgium. It's got those kind of nice curvy turnarounds here. Generally a double out and back with kind of last curve and helix. look at this one. This one actually has the highest ratings of everything, so 6.60, 8.52, 4.84. Definitely higher on the intensity, but I kind of figured that was going to be the case, especially when you get into these kind of tight climbing corners. It is what it is. For some reason, I must not have changed the speed of the lift hill, because 3 miles per hour is really, really slow for that, but on the whole, I think okay. That's decent pacing. Round. Don't want it to pause too much on those turnarounds. You want it to at least carry some speed there, but not go too fast that it feels. Out from the main layout, have our little off over here on the side. Finish up. Not too bad. Like I said, there's definitely some spaces we can continue to work with. There's all of this space right here. We didn't really do a lot in the backside here, or this kind of cherry tree section, or along the backside here, which always feels like it's kind of begging for shuttle loop or some kind of a thing. But I feel like we had a good mix of coasters with ones that inverted here, the terrain hugging one, the wooden coaster. That's a deep whole thing. Like I said before, any suggestions you have, feel free to drop them in the chat. And when extended version of this park, then try and incorporate some of those ideas as well. Next up is Bumblebee Beach. Stick around for that. And if you want to catch any of these scenario build streams live, you can join me at twitch.tv/academy. There's the description below. Love to see you stop by at one of those. So until next time, hope you enjoyed this series, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye now.